overwhelming manpower. From day one of the Ukraine war, using Russia's superior manpower has been Putin's strategy. The idea is simple: send soldiers to the slaughter to whittle away at Ukraine's defenses until they finally collapse. The problem with this strategy is the sheer human cost, and nothing demonstrates that cost better than the day Russia sent an entire platoon of soldiers that were wiped out in a single day by one Ukrainian soldier. 40 Russian deaths were recorded thanks to this single soldier who used drones and grenades to decimate the Russian platoon. That soldier is named Andrii Skibin, though he's better known in Ukraine by the call sign that now strikes fear into Russian hearts: Skiba. In a July 20 article, United24 Media told Skiba's story. It introduces the Ukrainian soldier as one of the finest and most innovative frontline tacticians the country has to offer. And there's a good reason for that. Skiba's exploits on the fateful day when he took out an entire Russian platoon transformed Ukraine's approach to its defense against Russia forever. Thanks to Skiba, Ukraine learned that drones could be as powerful a weapon as anything else that it has in its arsenal. They might even serve as the key to a Ukrainian victory. Skiba has been honoured already for his brave exploits. At just 25 years old, United24 says he's become the recipient of Ukraine's Order of the Gold Star. Awarded to those deemed to be heroes of Ukraine, the medal was instituted in August 1998 and is given to those who display outstanding acts of personal heroism in a military setting. Skiba has one of those stars, and he earned it by killing 40 Russian soldiers and injuring 40 more in a single day that proved just how effective drones could be. The story goes back to the early months of Putin's invasion. In addition to flooding Ukraine with Russian soldiers, Putin had started to rely on the infamous Wagner Group to carry out assaults on Ukraine's defenses. Then, a state-funded paramilitary group led by Yevgeny Prigozhin, Wagner was founded in 2014 and was officially registered as a private military company in 2022, according to the BBC. The group had almost no scruples about where it found its mercenaries. In fact, the more vicious, the better. Prigozhin started recruiting prisoners from Russian jails to serve in his growing private army. By June 2022, he had a force of 25,000 soldiers at his command. Those soldiers were put to work to help Putin with his invasion of Ukraine. The killing and torture of civilians was one of Wagner's stock in trade, with Ukrainian prosecutors saying at least 3 of its fighters engaged in these activities back in April 2022. It's also believed to be Wagner's soldiers who massacred civilians in Bucha in March 2022. The group was also heavily involved in the Battle of Bakhmut, eventually helping Russia to capture the key Ukrainian city in May 2023. Of course, it's now known that things weren't rosy between Putin and Prigozhin. After repeatedly criticizing the Russian army, Wagner's leader led a short-lived uprising that many saw as an attempted coup against Putin. Russia's president didn't take the coup lying down, though he eventually declared an uneasy peace with Prigozhin. It was no surprise when news broke that the Wagner Group leader died in a plane crash soon after his attempted insurrection. Another victim of mysterious Russian death syndrome. Perhaps, but the real point here is that Wagner under Prigozhin was among one of the most vicious groups Putin had available to him during the first year or so of the Ukraine war. That's likely the reason why Wagner Group fighters were chosen to work alongside Russia's 88th Brigade in the fighting that eventually led to Skiba's heroics. For months, Wagner and the 88th Brigade were attacking Ukraine's positions, and Skiba soon established himself as a key defensive force. United24 Media says that these attacks often led to Skiba using his drones to destroy up to 20 Wagner operatives and Russian soldiers per day. This was at a point when drone warfare was still in its infancy. Yet, despite drones being a relatively new battlefield technology, it was often Skiba who received the call whenever Ukraine soldiers on the ground came under attack. "I knew our guys were holding the line," he tells United24. "They called me on the radio. I knew them by name. How could I not help them when they asked?" It was during these responses to Russia's attacks that Skiba began refining the drone warfare techniques that are now a widespread part of Ukraine's strategy against Russia. It was Skiba who worked on understanding and setting the altitude limits for the primarily commercial drones Ukraine had at the time, essentially creating standards for future operators to follow. Skiba also worked on calculating flight paths for Ukraine's drones and became a key point of contact for Ukraine soldiers on the ground. Again, all of this work set standards for the future in terms of how Ukraine uses its drones and coordinates between its drone and infantry teams. With all of this groundwork laid, it should come as no surprise that Skiba was called into action one fateful night. United24 doesn't say precisely when the Russian night attack happened. However, it can be assumed, based on the involvement of Wagner Group mercenaries, that it was sometime in late 2022 or early 2023. Regardless, Ukraine was faced by a massive night assault conducted by Wagner and the 88th Brigade. Skiba came to the rescue. Armed only with a single Mavic 3T drone and 60 F1 grenades, Skiba alone held the line against the marauding Russian forces. Grenades dropped constantly. At various points during the nighttime assault, Skiba flew his drone as low as 23 feet off the ground, more than low enough for Russia's soldiers to take pot shots at the unmanned aerial vehicle, or UAV. At least they would have if they could see it, but the Russians never managed to catch Skiba's drone. He struck again and again with surgical precision, using his grenades to devastate an entire platoon of Russian soldiers that could have caused severe damage to Ukrainian infantry units on the ground. The result of this single night escapade mentioned earlier was clear. 40 Russian soldiers dead, another 40 injured. But even with that, Skiba wasn't satisfied. "Everyone says I've killed a lot of Ruskies. Sure, I have," Skiba tells United24. "But I don't see it as a milestone. It's not over. If I can do more, I will." And those words prove prophetic. After his already heroic exploits on the night of the Wagner and 88th Brigade attack, Skiba didn't rest on his laurels. Already established as one of Ukraine's best drone pilots, Skiba followed up the destruction of an entire Russian platoon by taking out a hero of Russia. The target was a decorated commander who went by the call sign Tashkent, according to United24. And Tashkent's death marked another drone innovation that Skiba spearheaded. The Ukrainian drone pilot was test flying one of Ukraine's original first-person view or FPV drones when he came across Tashkent. Skiba wasn't going to wait for another opportunity. He used the drone to take out the Russian commander, adding another feather to a cap that was already bristling. And that leads to today. Skiba is no longer the young drone operator setting the standard that Ukraine has followed in the years since. Today, he leads an FPV drone strike formation in Ukraine's K2 UAV Regiment, which is one of the most advanced drone units that Ukraine's ground forces have to offer. That regiment is scaling up from a battalion at this very moment, and again, it's Skiba who's leading the charge. "We're building from the ground up, new leaders, new systems. This isn't just about fighting, it's about growing," says Skiba. And that growth will terrify Putin. After all, more drones and more talented pilots to operate them will only lead to more death for a Russian army that's already experienced well over 1 million casualties. This mention of a team also leads to an important point. Though Skiba has received much of the glory, along with a medal for his destruction of an entire Russian platoon in a single night, he's never operated alone. Now that he leads his own FPV strike unit, he's working alongside a full team of like-minded innovators. Among them is a former marksman who goes by the call sign Bacchus. He helps Skiba by commanding FPV platoons behind their launch lines, United24 says. Skiba's drone unit has even become a family affair. Bacchus's father, Kara, is a drone engineer who works with Skiba's regiment to ensure that every drone Ukraine uses is combat ready and capable of destroying Russian soldiers. Others in the unit are more future focused. A former AI researcher dubbed Andrii is responsible for much of the hands-on work, including building and soldering, that takes place between missions. And yet another, operating under the callsign Bash, works on customization and scaling operations to ensure Skiba's regiment can hit faster and harder over time. Andrii highlights the attitude that makes Skiba's team so successful. "We used to do it all ourselves, build, fly, repair," Andrii tells United24. "Now the unit is bigger, but the mindset is the same. If it breaks, we fix it, and we keep flying." What Skiba's exploits have meant for the Ukraine war as a whole will be covered a bit later. But for a moment, back to the night when he took out an entire Russian platoon. Today, with drones being the primary weapon of the Ukraine war, that may not seem like an impossible achievement. Impressive, but very possible now that FPV drones blanket the battlefield. However, Skiba didn't have these modern tools available to him when he killed 40 Russian soldiers. All he had was a single Mavic 3T and a collection of F1 grenades. First, the Mavic 3T. Made in China, the Mavic line of drones was never intended to serve a military purpose. Most are quadcopter drones built for civilian or commercial use, such as aerial photography and videography. That makes what Skiba achieved all the more impressive. And the Mavic 3T specs only further reveal how talented Ukraine's young drone operator is. Take the Mavic 3T's maximum flight time for instance. The drone can only stay in the skies for about 45 minutes before its battery needs to be recharged. Think about what this means for Skiba's night of platoon destruction. That would have meant spending 45 minutes or less shuttling grenades back and forth between his concealed position to attack Russia's troops. When those 45 minutes were up, he'd have to recharge his drone, perhaps coordinating with Ukraine's forces on the ground to keep track of Russia's platoon as he did before sending it back out. The Mavic 3T has some features that make it a good choice for the job. It's compact, making it harder to see at night even when it's flying low. The drone also comes with a 640 by 512 pixel thermal camera, which is likely what allowed Skiba to conduct his nighttime strikes with such deadly precision. The drone's control pad also looks like a video game system, with a large screen providing a real-time view of the battlefield and simple buttons that allow an operator to control its functions. Still, the drone was built for aerial photography, and Skiba used it to carry out aerial bombardments. And speaking of those bombardments, the grenades Skiba used were no more remarkable than the drone. The F1 grenade is classified as a defensive hand grenade that's capable of taking out enemy combatants in unsheltered areas. It's a fragmentation grenade that generates no less than 800 fragments, and it comes loaded with just 0.13 pounds of TNT. Once the pin is pulled, the user has a delay time of about 5 seconds to throw the grenade. That delay time adds another wrinkle to Skiba's exploit. He would have needed to account for that when dropping the grenades, which is likely why he often flew his drone so low. Going too high would mean more seconds passed before the grenade hit the ground, potentially leading to a premature explosion that would have wasted a grenade. Skiba had to account for all of this. 40 dead Russian soldiers in a single night showed that he did. What Skiba did on this night, and with the rest of his work with Ukraine's drones, is lay the groundwork for the war as it's seen today. His work was a precursor to a war that's now being dominated by drones. Just look at more recent reports to see how important Skiba's innovative battle tactics were. For instance, July 17th saw the Independent report that the skies above Ukraine are now filled with a mixture of kamikaze and reconnaissance drones, many of which are variations of the FPV drones that Skiba once tested. Bomber and even anti-drone UAVs have been added to the mix, and both Russia and Ukraine are utilizing drones to devastating effect. For instance, the contact lines between Ukrainian and Russian forces are now lined with kill zones stretching about 6.2 miles wide. In these zones are swarms of FPV drones that quickly spot and swarm on any soldier unfortunate enough to wander into them. Beyond individual soldiers and Russian platoons, any armoured vehicle operating close to the front lines has also become a target. Ukraine has created a system that centralizes video feeds from over 15,000 drones, with all of that information helping the country's forces to locate targets and assign priorities for its drone strikes. Rather than being a threat that the occasional unit of Russian soldiers has to worry about, drones are now the demons of the skies that are taking out Putin's forces en masse. They're also the biggest killers in the Ukraine war. In April, Army Technology reported that drones are now responsible for between 70 and 80% of the combat casualties Ukraine and Russia experience. Think about what that means for a moment. On July 22 alone, Russia lost about 970 soldiers. Assuming Army Technology is correct, between 679 and 776 of those soldiers would have fallen victim to Ukraine's drones. Russia also lost 3 tanks, 2 armoured fighting vehicles and 42 artillery systems on that day. The odds are high that a good percentage of that equipment was also destroyed by drones. None of this would have been possible without Skiba and early drone operators like him. He proved that drones can not only be useful as reconnaissance tools, but even the most basic commercial drones could be transformed into dangerous weapons. His Mavic 3T already showed Russia that it's practically impossible to run from a drone once it has its target in its sights. And Ukraine has only built more and better drones since Skiba destroyed an entire Russian platoon in one night. Today, Mavic 3T drones are the least of Russia's worries. It's having to deal with an exploding Ukrainian drone manufacturing sector that's building around 4.5 million drones per year, and with some extra funding could pump that number up to 8 million. If the battlefield feels like it's engulfed in a sea of drones right now, the sea is only going to get deeper and more dangerous as the war moves deeper into its 4th year. And Ukraine's drones are also getting better, much better. Ukraine has been pioneering the use of artificial intelligence in its drones, with May 29 bringing with it news of the first ever deployment of what the Kyiv Independent labels a mother drone. This incredible UAV can carry 2 FPV drones up to 186 miles into Russian-controlled territory, where it then unleashes those drones, which are controlled using AI to strike against unsuspecting Russian soldiers. Ukraine spent about $10,000 per operation conducted using this innovative new drone, hundreds of times less than it would spend on a missile strike that does an equivalent amount of damage. Ukraine's drone usage also isn't restricted to attacking Russia's troops on the ground. The Atlantic Council points out that Ukraine's Magura V7 unmanned marine vehicles can now operate at sea for days at a time. Those drones have proven instrumental in Ukraine turning Russia's once dreaded Black Sea fleet into a non-factor in the war. Ukraine has also used these sea-borne drones to launch attacks on the Kerch Bridge, which connects Crimea to the Russian mainland. All of this is innovation that was made possible and proven to be viable by operators like Skiba. In 2014, Mavic drones were all that Ukraine had. That's according to Katerina Bondar, who's a fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies Vodvarny Center. In a May interview, she said,
So first we have to remember that Ukrainian war has started in 2014, and at that time the most common drone which was deployed on the front line was Chinese DJI Mavic drone. It was quite expensive, it was $2,000, and mostly it was acquired by Ukrainian soldiers, so they couldn't afford to buy a lot, but it already has proved to be really efficient for ISR missions.
Ukraine saw the potential in drones over a decade ago. Skiba expanded on that potential by turning a single Mavic drone into a death-dealing machine. And now, Ukraine has shown just how effective drones can be against an army that's much larger and, at least in terms of sheer volume, much better equipped. The country's innovation has reached the point where the Atlantic Council said in July that Ukraine's drone war now serves as Europe's first line of defense against Putin's invading forces. As for Skiba, he's still working away. His drone unit is innovating tactically as Ukraine's manufacturers build new, better and stronger drones. The destruction of a platoon of Russian soldiers would, on the surface, simply seem like an extremely impressive achievement by a very talented drone operator. It is just that. But that night also transformed the entire approach Ukraine has taken to its war with Russia. Without Skiba, there may not have been the drone army Ukraine has developed today. And without that army, there may not have been any more Ukraine. Now, it's not just in the drone warfare arena where Ukraine innovates. It's using clever counter-attacking and ambush tactics to take out Russian troops right at the point when Putin's forces think they're victorious. The Russians thought they were winning, but Ukraine had other plans, as you'll discover if you check out our video. And if you'd like to see more from the military show, remember to subscribe for videos covering the latest developments in the Ukraine war.